This is George Galloway for كلمة on Mayadeen television, coming to you from London. Coming to you from London. I'm George Galloway, presenting كلمة where every word is free. Welcome to كلمة with me, George Galloway, for Mayadeen television, coming to you from London. We are discussing Turkey, the Kurds, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the great battle which is unfolding in the Arab region against the apparently ever-rising tide of fanaticism and extremism. It's a vexed question. And we have distinguished guests here from all sides. But I'm going to take it as a given that we all agree that ISIS and Al-Qaeda and what they represent has to be defeated because it represents an existential threat to all of us, to all states, to all societies, and to the Muslim world itself as a whole. Now, that's a given for me. I'm assuming it's a given in this audience, but of course there are other audiences for whom it is not a given. It would be a grave mistake to imagine either that ISIS are some kind of fake army of Israeli Mossad agents in uniform with beards. That's absurd, though I sometimes hear it. It would be a mistake to think that ISIS and what it represents does not have a base. Al-Qaeda does not have a base amongst a section of the Muslim population in many countries, including the one I'm standing in now. It is said that Turkey, the Turkish state, is now joining this battle, although most of us still await evidence of that. But if it is true, it is very good news. It will make ISIS and Al-Qaeda very much easier to defeat if Turkey is genuinely, seriously joining the battle. Because, of course, the long border between Turkey and Syria is the border through which tens, maybe scores of thousands of foreign fighters have crossed into Syria. Stolen antiquities, stolen oil from Syria has passed in the other direction. And it's fanciful to suggest that a substantial amount of weaponry and other war materiel has not also crossed into ISIS-controlled territory other than through Turkey. Now, let me say at the outset, I've said it many times on Mayadeen, I say it because it's not a view shared by everyone, but it is my view, and I must state it. I was for a long time a great admirer of President Erdogan. I believe that he transformed Turkey in many important respects, economically, but also in the struggle against discrimination and so on. I also felt that Erdogan was the only man in Turkey who could make a historic peace with the Kurdish minority in the country, that no one else either would do so or could do so. And I supported absolutely the policy of Erdogan and Davutoglu of no enemies amongst the neighbors. But of course, all of that has come over recent years to a grinding halt. However, since that change of heart was announced, what have we seen? We saw permission granted for United States jets to use Incirlik Air Base to bomb ISIS and Al-Qaeda targets, well, certainly ISIS targets in Syria. But weeks went by before a single mission was flown, and very few missions have been flown to date. What we have seen is a breakdown in the long truce, ceasefire, and political negotiation process between the Turkish state and the Kurdish minority. And now, blood is flowing in all directions. Let's take some of the audience contributions. Yes, madam, you're first.
Hello. First of all, thank you very much for providing this open platform for the free words. And my name is Merve Kansel. I work for Center for Turkey Studies as an analyst and coordinator. I would like to provide some information from the near history for those who are not maybe familiar with the issues. I won't go very back. To start the first, after 1980 coup d'état in Turkey, the atmosphere completely changed, and in 1984, PKK came out to the stage and they started to fight for their self-determination. For the Kurdish population in the mostly eastern part of the Turkey. And after 1984, when PKK started their armed fight with the government powers, they gave up their complete independence aims in 1990s, because even Abdullah Öcalan, who is the leader of PKK, he stated in his own book that PKK will no longer fight for independence because this is not realistic. So they only want for the democratic solution and local self-governance within Turkey under the unity of Turkish government. And this is what he has stated in his book, which was a very important change in PKK and their policies and their actions. So after what happened, coming to the near history, we can see that after the violent 1990s and states violence against PKK and against Kurdish people, after 2002 they started to go under the AK Party's new policies, because AK Party came out to the stage and they wanted to make reforms. It was a fresh time for Turkey. Everyone was excited, and AK Party was willing to do reforms to also for making happy the Western allies, because Erdogan is a very powerful political figure. He was very strong and he wanted to make reforms, and he did very good things. I mean, when you look back in 1990s, people were not able to say, "Oh, I am Kurdish and I have a Kurdish identity and I speak Kurdish. This is my identity." This was not possible, but yeah, after Erdogan came out to the stage, and I'm talking about Erdogan because he's a very strong, powerful man, but actually it's a political party. AK Party is a whole party that get the vote from the people of Turkey, but Erdogan played a very important role. So this is also one of the problems that we are facing today, because his characteristic and his charisma and his power, his words, and the way he addresses people, it's very charming for Turkish people, and Turkey really feels the need to have this one strong man that's ruling their country and that's doing good things for their country. So we see that AK Party, every term they came to power, and also with the help of European Union, they wanted to make reforms. They released, they did new legislations and everything. But also after this last election, there was a very, AK Party didn't want HDP to join the elections as one party, because what happened in the stage, AK Party wanted to continue its power. And then this was not the case, because HDP gained 80 members of parliament, and this was not a happy end for AK Party, and there was no coalition, and here we are talking about a new election, and there is violence going on everywhere in the country. as we have seen the results, after the results, everyone was happy, not the AK party. Everyone was happy, like people were hopeful. They thought this is going to be a new chapter in the country, because now HDP is in the parliament as a party, and it's recognized. It has the power of the people. It will be the voice of the people, not only Kurdish people, but for everyone. And this was their agenda, but this was not matching with AK Party's agenda. So after these elections, there had this Suruç massacre happened, and young people died, more than 30 people. And this is the point where everything got blurry, because actually the country lost its control. And after this massacre, everywhere was full of violence. And after this attack, PKK took the responsibility for killing of 2 policemen in Şanlıurfa. And after that, AK Party provided the information that they are willing to be allies with NATO, and US as a NATO country. They want to give their airbase, Incirlik Air Base, to US, and they started to let US airplanes and also NATO airplanes bomb ISIS, but they didn't take part in the fight themselves. There is a fear in Turkey that the country will lose its control and it will go into a fight in Syria and ISIS and everything. So in this chaotic atmosphere, people don't know what to do. They are just watching the, how to say, this media who is oppressed by the government and who is under pressure. So under this atmosphere, it's not very possible to reach people and show the truths.
Well, everyone has their own truth, and that's your version of the near history. I suspect it's not entirely shared by everyone in the room. So who'd like to give, as it were, a contrary version of the near history? Let's see if anyone would like to contest any of those points. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
I don't think I will give a contradiction, because I would always agree with ladies. But I think that the facts to go, I think after the Suruç massacre, the 32 young people were mostly Kurds, were killed in bomb attack. I think the entire Kurdish population, not only in Turkey, but in the region, believed, whether it's right or wrong, I don't really know, I have no information, AKP, Haq Party, that they were responsible for the massacre, because they were somehow disillusioned that HDP, this is the pro-Kurdish party. Of course, it's not a Kurdish party, it's a Turkish national party, but with a Kurdish coalition in it. This definitely changed the situation with the Kurds. And this was really the start, I think, as my sister put it rightly, that is true. But then what was missing in that equation, Turkey decided, for whatever reason, that it will join the coalition to attack ISIS, Islamic State insurgent groups. But at the same time, what the mistake Turkey did was also, on the same day, first attack the PKK base in Qandil in Iraqi Kurdistan, and killed many guerrillas there, despite the so-called peace process going on. And at the same time, many believes, rightly or wrongly, I don't know, to justify that attack few bases of ISIS. But the facilitation, I don't say support, I say the facilitation that Turkey does for ISIS is still in place. Facilitation is that, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, that allowing insurgents to move into Syria and Iraq, and also allowing their insurgents wounded and to be treated in the hospitals and so on. So I think we are in a very bad now, very critical crossroad now. And I think the bloodshed that is going on, as you mentioned in your introduction, doesn't help anyone. So as you say, as you know, it's very, very complicated. And I'm just like you, I have no solution for it.
We're not here to solve it, and it's beyond us to solve it. But we do have properly to analyze it, factually to analyze it. So I ask again, does anyone wish to contest the central thesis of what I had to say. Yes, sir, go ahead.
جابر بشتغل كصحفي. تركيا عم تمر بمرحلة دقيقة جدا، عم تأثر سياستها الداخلية على تصرفاتها وتحديد عوامل السياسة الخارجية اللي عم تحددها تركيا لتدير متطلبات أمن القومي. النقطة الأساسية بالتحول السياسة الخارجية التركية وتعاملها مع الملف تنظيم الدولة الإسلامية بسوريا وهجمات على منظمة حزب العمال الكردستاني بتركيا والعراق، هي كانت نقطة مفصلية تفجير المجزرة اللي صارت بمدينة سروج واللي أعقبها مقتل 2 من عناصر الشرطة التركية بمدينة شان الأورفا. هي النقطة المفصلية هي اللي غيرت بسياسة تركيا الخارجية تجاه سوريا وتجاه المنطقة كلياتها. نحن بدنا نلاحظ إنه ليش حزب العمال الكردستاني قام بعد يومين من تفجير سروج بقتل 2 من عناصر الشرطة التركية. يعني نحن لاحظنا إنه تركيا بعد التفجير هي اتهمت تنظيم الدولة الإسلامية بأنها قامت بالتفجير وقامت بقتل 30 شخص كردي، طبعا مواطن كردي بتركيا. ولكن لماذا قام حزب العمال الكردستاني باستفزاز تركيا وجرى لتشن حرب عليه من أول وجديد بعد ما كان في عملية سلام ماشية وناجحة وصلت لمراحل متقدمة بأن تضع تركيا وعملية السلام والأكراد بمصير واحد ومصير مشترك ويوصلوا لحل سلمي وسياسي بيضمن للأتراك والأكراد يعيشوا بوطن واحد ضمن هوية واحدة ويتقاسموا كل الأمور اللي هي متواجدة بأي دولة فيها عدة أعراق. النقطة الرئيسية اللي نحكي عنها إنه لماذا قام حزب العمال الكردستاني بهذا الهجوم؟ هذا الهجوم هو اللي غير السياسة الخارجية التركية وخلاها تعطي القواعد، تأخذ من الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية تصريح بأن تقوم بهجوم على مواقع حزب العمال الكردستاني بالعراق وبجبال قنديل وداخل تركيا، وتقوم بنفس الوقت بضربات يعني نقول خفيفة أو وهمية ضد تنظيم الدولة الإسلامية بسوريا، مقابل سماح للولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وللطيران التحالف الدولي اللي بشكل لمحاربة تنظيم الدولة باستخدام القواعد التركية لشن هجمات على تنظيم الدولة بسوريا والعراق. أنا يعني النقطة اللي كثير ما عم بفهمها إنه لماذا قام حزب العمال الكردستاني بهذا الهجوم، هذه الأعمال الاستفزازية. هو الآن في مرحلة ليس في حالة إنه يستجر عدو قديم وشعل حرب معه جديدة. يعني هلا حزب العمال الكردستاني عم يقوم بمعارك بالعراق ضد تنظيم الدولة الإسلامية وبمعارك بسوريا ضد تنظيم الدولة الإسلامية. ليش فتح على نفسه عدو جديد كان سكره من زمان؟
Yes, sir, please.
My name is Mohammed Saleh. I'm a Kurdish PhD in ethnopolitical studies. We as Kurds, we have like a saying, and to a good extent I agree, and I think it's a valid point, which is, as Kurds we have no friends, and no one would want to talk about Kurds unless they benefit from that. For instance, 2 years ago, on 28th of February 2013, the House of Commons debated a motion in regards of the genocides of the Kurds in Iraq, in the 25th anniversary of the genocide of the Kurds in Iraq. And not many MPs took part in that debate, with all my due respects, including yourself. And the question is that, does this saying apply to what we're doing tonight?
I'm really not understanding you. I don't even know the debate you refer to.
I think I met you in London. I asked you.
I didn't take part in that debate.
You didn't.
No.
The question is that why, at that important juncture of the Kurdish history, which we want as the Kurds in Iraq to have a saying on the genocide of the Kurds to be recognized by the Parliament of the UK, not many people took part in it. But now, as my argument is that Turkey wanted to use the case of ISIS. We wanted Turkey to be to our side, and we are fighting in the front line against ISIS for more than a year and more than 1,000 kilometers. They didn't take part into the war, but when they wanted. They used the case of the ISIS to fight the Kurds. And same thing apply to what we talking about. So yourself, you didn't want to talk about the Kurds, but why now?
you really can't keep saying that because I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm sure you know. I asked you in London.
I have never.
I met you. I said.
I don't even remember
this morning.
You
You
said. You have to forgive me. Okay. But I have no knowledge of the debate to which you refer. There are hundreds and hundreds of debates in the British Parliament, and I could and probably was doing any one of many hundreds of things. I assure you, there was no significance in the fact that I was not at a debate. I didn't know was happening, and have never heard of until to take part. I've never heard of until you raised tonight. But it is interesting that you want to make an enemy of me in this debate, when actually I'm on your side in this debate, which may be one of the reasons. I just ask you to consider this: why you don't find it so easy to make friends and influence people.
Exactly, because that's why I'm here.
You don't find it.
I know you
you're
are
demonstrating why, how you find it difficult to make friends and influence people. I don't know if it's something in the political timber of your organizations or something else. But I'm actually supporting the Kurds, but you've come here to attack me.
My question is that as the Turkey
attack me.
As the Turkey using the ISIS case to fight the Kurds.
Anyway, you and I'll have this out after the break.
I'm sure you're clever too.
You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Mayadeen television, coming to you from London. Spirited debate already underway about the whole question of the Kurds, the Turks, ISIS, Syria, Iraq, and all matters associated with it. Just before the break, a Kurdish gentleman, a PhD no less, indicated that he felt that the Kurds had no friends except people who had an interest in them, taking an interest from them. That may or may not be true. It's certainly my historic appreciation that people have picked up and put down the Kurdish question according to whether it suited their geopolitical interests or not. And that people maintained, in the immortal words of Lord Archer, the former prison convict, now member of the House of Lords, when he said that there are good Kurds and there are bad Kurds. And by the good Kurds, he meant the ones who were fighting the people we were fighting. And by the bad Kurds, he meant those who were fighting the people who were our friends. And roughly speaking, he delineated that between the Kurds in Iraq and the Kurds in Turkey. The penultimate speaker before the break, the distinguished journalist, asked why the PKK had staged what he called a provocation, killing 2 police officers and starting the war. Of course, it takes 2 to tango, it takes 2 to have a war. Not everybody goes to war over 2 police officers, however dastardly the crime of killing 2 police officers is. But if I could summarize why I think they acted as they did, it would be thus: that the massacre, although not carried out by the Turkish state, of course, was nonetheless the responsibility of the Turkish state. Because if ISIS massacred 30 people, young people, mainly Kurds, if ISIS was able to do that, they were only able to do that because somebody had made them strong. Somebody had allowed them to grow. Somebody had funded them, armed them, facilitated them, provided them with all the material that made them strong enough to carry out that atrocity. So I think the young woman was saying that Kurdish people felt that this attack was an attack on all of them, and that the Turkish state shared responsibility because of its failure to fight ISIS, and worse, because of its support for ISIS objectively over the previous several years. That's my take on it. Let's hear what other people think. Yes, sir.
Hi, George. My name's Aqib. Just by looking at the discussion now and observing Turkey for a couple of years, I've been analyzing Erdogan's policies and his reforms and everything going on in Turkey politically. He's managed to make two or three strategic errors, one after the other. First of all, he backed ISIS for some unknown reason and completely turned on its head his foreign policy of having friends with the neighbors and not causing any problems and not causing any issues, which was very strange at the time. And it's coming back to haunt him now because just recently a video from ISIS has been released where they've now clearly said that Istanbul's a target and we're going to go for Turkey. This was bound to happen. As you know before, that it's the same as Al-Qaeda as it is with ISIS. You can't support these lunatics and not expect them to come back at you. And the same things happened with Turkey and ISIS. Now, as far as the Kurdish question is concerned, I think you're right when you say that the Kurdish people, if you're asking them not to ask for independence, if you're asking them not to ask for separation, and you're saying you're Turkish citizens, then it's the responsibility of the Turkish state to defend them and protect them, even at the expense of taking on ISIS. Even if your policy as a Turkish state is to support ISIS secretly or openly or whatever, you can't expect you can't expect Kurds living in Turkey to not, to not have a reaction when you fail to defend them. There will be a reaction, and I think it's one strategic error after another, and Turkey is going to pay a grave price for this because the United States is nobody's friend in the region, and they have a massive strategic interest in keeping all of these nations fighting each other, whether it's Turks fighting Kurds or Kurds fighting ISIS or Syria fighting Iran or Iraq or ISIS or whatever. They're all going to be fighting each other. It's just one massive quagmire and no one's going to be able to get out of it because at the moment no one even knows why they're killing each other. That's what's happened. That's what's only been achieved in the last few years, and it's just a total mess.
Yes. I think that's a fair summary of the total mess. Let me deal with just the first point. It's quite obvious, those who studied it closely at the time, heard Davutoglu in particular say over and over again that Bashar al-Assad's regime would fall in 2 weeks, in 2 weeks, in 2 weeks, in 2 weeks. It was always 2 weeks. I don't know why I didn't amend that rhetoric. But of course, nearly 5 years on, the regime is still standing, too strong to fall, too weak to recapture the territory which has been taken from it. So we have a stalemate, an impasse, and when there's an impasse on the battlefield, there has to be talks and negotiations. So I presume that the grand strategic error to which you refer, the biggest one, of effectively assisting an invasion by foreigners of the neighbour in the hope that the regime would swiftly fall, is such a devastating mistake that it deserves to cause the downfall of the government, of the regime. Just like Saddam Hussein's equally disastrous decisions to invade Iran and then to invade and occupy Kuwait. Whatever other achievements anybody has, when you make mistakes as gigantic as that, you're bound to fall, and you deserve to fall. And that's, I think, part of the reason why Erdogan has lost his majority. It's part of the reason why the grand plan of achieving a two-thirds majority in the parliament, changing the constitution and so on, went from that plan to one in which he can't even form an administration. I think that's the beginning of this historic accounting for this gigantic strategic mistake. We have a saying in English that treason never prospers, because if it prospers, nobody dares to call it treason. If Davutoglu had been right and the Syrian regime had fallen in any of those 2 weeks that he predicted, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But they didn't fall, and therefore the huge gamble that the Erdogan regime took has now left them in a disaster. They are embroiled in the war in Syria. This ipso facto gives them a problem with the regime in Baghdad. The decision to support ISIS has alienated many people in the world from them, including me, who previously had goodwill towards them. And of course, the performance of the Kurdish fighters in Syria has been so inspiring, indeed inspiring beyond words when we're talking about young women fighters, for example, in Kobani, Ain al-Arab, standing up against these head-chopping, heart-eating beasts on two legs, these young women fighting them. They'll be making films, movies about this for many, many years to come. So actually Erdogan has strengthened the PKK, has alienated much Western support, and has not achieved any of the goals that he set himself. And now the Kurdish peace process, which could have been the feather in his cap, has reached this terrible impasse where war and blood is everywhere. Who else would? Yes, the gentleman at the back.
My
Yes,
name
sir.
is Joseph Afrani from worldtodaypress.com. George, you mentioned about how are you going to, no, you mentioned about ISIS has to be defeated. My question is, how are you going to defeat them? And then the second one is, who arms the ISIS?
Well, ISIS was in the beginning Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and then Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, then the so-called Caliph al-Baghdadi, whose real name is Samarra'i, expelled Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda expelled him. So they had whatever weapons that formation previously possessed, and then they took most of the rest on the battlefield. When the Iraqi armed forces collapsed in the Great Sweep in the summer of 2014, they ran away and left their weapons. They left their jeeps, their Toyotas, their heavy weapons, their light weapons, their uniforms, everything except their underwear in which they fled. That was a big bonanza of weaponry, but an even bigger bonanza was to be found in the banks of the cities like Fallujah, like Mosul, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that were in those banks. And that money was then used in part to purchase new weapons. Much of the new weaponry came across the Turkish border. And the rest of the weapons they took off the other inferior, militarily inferior rebel formations. And they had got those weapons from Western countries, either directly from the United States. In the case of Britain, we supplied so-called non-lethal war material, and the US satrapies in the Persian Gulf provided money to these formations and many, many weapons, which ISIS then promptly took from them, like taking candy from a baby, because none of these other organizations can stand up to ISIS. So if you give weapons into that area, you know they're going to end up in the hands of ISIS. The United States recently sent 50 crack US-trained ISIS alternatives into Syria, and within hours they were all taken prisoner, except those that were killed, and all their weapons and all their material was taken from them. And that, because you know that's going to happen, you are effectively directly supplying ISIS, because you know that the weapons are going to end up in their hands. Over to you.
It means you can't defeat ISIS.
No, we can.
You can.
We can and must.
Yeah, unless you stop the banks
We can and
funding
must.
the ISIS as well as Boko Haram.
Well,
Now, we don't talk about Boko Haram in Africa. I'm from Africa.
We have actually talked about Boko Haram, but perhaps not this evening, as Turkey has no responsibility for Boko Haram. But we can and must defeat them. But the only people who can defeat them are the people there. We have to strengthen those that are already fighting ISIS. In the case of Syria, that means strengthening the Syrian Arab army and strengthening the Kurdish militia that have fought so valiantly and to whom I just referred. We have to deliver to the Iraqi regime in Baghdad the weapons that in many cases they've already paid for but not had. But that won't solve the whole problem, because the Iraqi regime's forces have proven pitifully inadequate in the battlefield. So the neighbours have a responsibility. First of all, not to make matters worse by allowing ISIS to become any stronger, and preferably on an agreed basis by intervening in the conflict on the ground themselves. Saudi Arabia has spent trillions of dollars on weapons. It has a lot of weapons. There's no need for old Royal Air Force planes to go all the way from England to bomb ISIS. Why can't Saudi Arabia bomb ISIS? Why can't Turkey bomb ISIS? There's no reason to send soldiers from the old colonizing powers to reoccupy Syria and Iraq. Why can't the neighbors go and fight ISIS? After all, we're not talking about the Wehrmacht here. We're not talking about Hitler's legions. We're talking about a rag-bag death gang, murder cult. We're talking about people who a year ago or 2 years ago were waiters serving curries in Indian restaurants. We're not talking about crack commandos. Why can't they be defeated by all those armies in Iraq, in Syria, and in the neighboring countries? But if we don't, we're all doomed. Because this, I was going to call it an organization, but it's more a mindset. It's more a method. It's the Al-Qaeda, Bin Laden method with bells and whistles added. The kind of people who can do the kind of things that they are doing every day, so that they have to invent something even more hideous in order to make the news, because all the previous hideousness means that nobody actually is paying very much attention, are an existential threat, not just to the states in the region, but to all of us. We'll continue this after the break. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Mayadeen television, coming from London, discussing ISIS and all interconnected issues. In particular, we're looking at the role of Turkey and whether that role is now going to change, or whether that so-called change of role was really just a cover so that the Turkish state could more efficaciously prosecute its war against its Kurdish minority and their political and military representatives. We've heard from at least two of the sides in the argument. There may be more. Let's hear from them. Yes.
I just really want, I didn't say my name first. My name is Reba Fata. I just would like to shed some light on ISIS itself, because the way we discuss it is rather theoretical and somehow isolated from the people of the region. Let us just, I hate history, but I will take you back to 2003 when the Iraqi central state demolished and chaos wall, as we know, the rest in the history. So they were at the time, at the height, like 2006 and 2007, they were around 150,000 insurgents in Iraq. These are people, outlawed people. This huge number evolved, I just cut out the history, to become ISIS. And let us look at the failure of the Iraqi state, which we miss now. Because what's established in Iraq after 2003 is, we like it or not, is a Shia-dominated regime. It's not a state by its known or Western meaning. It's a Shia state, and it's alienated Sunnis. There's no doubt about that. And when if we are saying that ISIS has no basis among the Sunni people in Iraq, we are totally wrong.
No, I'm not saying
because they were welcoming ISIS when they moved to Mosul, and that's why the Iraqi army demolished like ice overnight. So they have a lot of popular support. And that's why they have been fighting in major cities up to now, in Tikrit, in Anbar, while they're occupying Mosul, in Salah ad-Din, and not far from Baghdad, they are in Abu Ghraib. And Baghdad is not under their control, but Baghdad is what I call under their reach. They can reach Baghdad. And last few weeks, if you watch the news, if you read the media, you know there's a huge bombing campaign. To solve the problem, you have to change the state of Iraq in order to become a civilized, modern state representing all sections of Iraqi people, including Sunnis. You cannot have, as you put it, good Kurds and bad Kurds. You cannot have good Sunnis and bad Sunnis. The state must represent everybody if it's going to be a state. And that's why the Iraqi army is suffering to get into Fallujah, get into, I don't know, Salah ad-Din. I know they occupy overnight, but they lose overnight again. So let us not see ISIS as an isolated group that moved somewhere out of sky into that region and occupied. And the other thing, let us not forget, they have a huge regional support. We already mentioned Turkey. We already mentioned Saudi. We didn't mention Qatar. And there are others in the region supporting ISIS. So ISIS is a national issue for Iraq and Syria. It's also a regional issue, unless the region can get together with a goodwill, which I can't see it, to solve the ISIS problem. It's not going to solve overnight. It's not, I can't say it more, it's not a security issue. It's a social issue, it's a political issue. Unless you solve. And because a social and political issue will become a security issue, as happened in Turkey. If Turkey grants Kurds their rights, there won't be the PKK. There won't be armed struggle. But when you deprive people from learning their own language, you create a kind of worms. And
to be fair, Erdogan changed all that.
No.
Yes,
you can't study in Kurdish, not in the education system, still not in Kurdish. The Kurdish kids must study from primary school to the university in Turkish. And this is part of the fight. If that will be, because this process is one-sided. The PKK stops the conflict, and Turkey, Erdogan's regime, make a propaganda. Now the country is peaceful. People going visiting. Erdogan's economy improved, but it doesn't step forwards. There are some tokens, like you have a satellite TV. Big deal. This is satellite TV. What else? Nothing. Education system, no. There are thousands and thousands of politicians in prisons. There are thousands and thousands of people tortured. I mean, this is not solving the problem. And same true for the ISIS. Unless the politics of the region change, unless the foreign policies of these Western countries change, ISIS will remain there, the PKK will remain there.
Well, look, first of all, the 150,000 number that you gave, that existed at the height of the insurrection against the occupation in 2006-07, this included a very substantial number of the army of Saddam Hussein, the officers and men of this army. They are not ISIS. They are Baathists. They are Arab nationalists. Some of them have metamorphosed into Islamists, although it's a very odd metamorphosis, but most of them have not. And any sensible government, which al-Maliki's government was not, would have pursued policies to separate these Arab nationalists from their Islamist allies. But they could not do that. They could not release political prisoners, for example. They could not, they watched while people withered and died in their jails when they were of no use whatsoever as prisoners, but could have been use in helping to divide the Baathis from the Islamists. That was a very big and important mistake. I didn't mean to imply that all of ISIS are waiters formerly serving curry in Dutch restaurants, although a lot of the foreign fighters do come into that category. And it's absolutely the case that if the people of Mosul wanted to, they could rise up and overthrow ISIS. They are 2 million people. The reason why ISIS can hold and govern Mosul for all of this time without any apparent difficulty is because many of the people, maybe most of the people in Mosul, don't really make a judgment between the regime in Baghdad and the regime of ISIS. They have no love, maybe, for either of them. Or maybe they even prefer ISIS to the regime in Baghdad. Now, al-Maliki was forced out. We were told that the new prime minister was going to pursue a much more sophisticated policy to do exactly as you prescribe, to seduce, to win sections of the Sunni population in the west of Iraq to the regime's side. But that has not happened. At least I see no evidence that it has happened or that it is having an effect. So that's the second major blunder. But if we're going to wait for a modern democratic Iraq to emerge before we can defeat ISIS, we're in very big trouble. Because I'll tell you, my own view is there will never emerge a modern democratic state in Iraq. And that would mean, on your thesis, that ISIS will grow and grow and grow, and we can't afford that. So it's a necessary but not sufficient, I grant you, a necessary but not sufficient condition to defeat ISIS militarily. That doesn't crush the ideology, it doesn't crush the conditions that led to ISIS in the first place, but unless we stop them, they're going to be in power, at least in Damascus, in a country on the Mediterranean.
Well, they are in power in Raqqa and
they are.
And Ba'ad.
They are, but when their black flag is flying in Damascus and John the Baptist's head is being kicked around like a football, then you can be sure everybody's going to know just how big a problem we now have. We have to find a way to stop this ISIS phenomenon growing militarily in the here and now. That's my point of view. What's yours? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
بعتقد انه اللي سمح بسقوط الموصل واعطى الاوامر للجيش العراقي بانه يسلم وينسحب من الموصل هو اللي عم بيساعد تنظيم الدولة لحتى يكبر وينمو. وبنفس الوقت اللي بسوريا سمح لتنظيم الدولة بانه يستولي على ألوية كاملة بأسلحتها بشمال سوريا تحديدا بالرقة وألوية المحيطة بمدينة الرقة، هو اللي ساعد على بناء قوة تنظيم الدولة اللي هاللقطين تقريبا لا تقهر المنطقة مقابل باقي الفصائل المنطقة. وكمان الطرف الدولي اللي منع تسليح المعارضة السورية بفترة من الفترات بحجة خوفه من ذهاب هذه الأسلحة إلى الأيدي الخطأ، ساهم بتقوية تنظيم الدولة على حساب المعارضة السورية اللي كان ما تجيها دعم، بنفس الوقت اللي كان يجيها دعم لتنظيم الدولة بأشكال خفية وبعض الأحيان بأشكال معلومة. لذلك قضية القضاء على تنظيم الدولة أو عدم القدرة على القضاء على تنظيم الدولة هي بتعود للأطراف اللي ساهمت بقوة وبناء قوة وتقوية تنظيم الدولة الإسلامية بالعراق وسوريا. هذا السؤال يمكن نطرحه على الدول اللي ساهمت بهذا الشيء، بالتحديد على نور المالكي وعلى النظام السوري اللي هنو ساهموا بشكل كبير جدا ببناء قوته لتنظيم الدولة الإسلامية. تنظيم الدولة الإسلامية كان بادئ أو منشأ من عام 2006 بالعراق كتنظيم القاعدة في العراق، ولكن اللي ساهم ببناء قوته وصار هلا قوة اللي يحسب لها حساب بالمنطقة وبالعراق وسوريا هو نور المالكي رئيس وزراء العراق السابق والنظام السوري اللي ساهم بهذا الموضوع بتسليم ألوية كاملة من السلاح وضرب مواقع المعارضة وقت يكون المعارضة بنفس الوقت عم تقاتل تنظيم الدولة في شمال سوريا. لذلك النقطة الرئيسية هي أنه تنظيم الدولة يمكن هزيمته بكل سهولة عندما بتنتفي الأسباب اللي ساهمت بدعمه وتقويته، وهي الأنظمة الشمولية والديكتاتورية بالمنطقة.
First of all, it wasn't a dictatorial government. Al-Maliki's government was an elected government. As a matter of fact, it even won the last election, even though the United States then forced him out. But secondly, You're keen to blame everyone else for the growth of ISIS, but the elephant in the room I must bring you back to. The idea that Turkey is not a major, arguably the major, contributory factor to the growth of ISIS in Syria is not one that's credible. Certainly not credible, I suspect, in this audience, in the audience watching this program, and amongst informed people in all countries. It is obvious if you say that Turkey is now joining the fight against ISIS, then by definition it was not in the fight against ISIS before it just decided to be so. And that would be bad enough, given that Turkey is a member of NATO, and NATO is fighting ISIS, and under Chapter 7, I think it is, of NATO's articles, a war between one member of NATO and someone is a war between all members of NATO and that adversary. So it's admitted implicitly that Turkey was not in this fight before the last few weeks. But everybody knows, sorry to tell you, everybody knows that Turkey has opened its gates and doors to this phenomenon, to Al-Qaeda, to ISIS, and to all associated formations. Now, I'll let you back in, of course, but the cheekiest thing you said was to say that we should have allowed weapons to go to the other opposition forces so that they could fight ISIS. You know very well that none of them are in a position to fight ISIS. You know very well that whenever they have been given weapons, ISIS have merely taken the weapons off them. So like taking candy from a baby, any weapons, any money, any material given to these largely stooge and imaginary formations will quickly end up in the hands of ISIS. And everybody who is doing that must know it. And Turkey definitely knows it. And the idea that the regime in Damascus are going to allow other head choppers and heart eaters to get stronger so that they can fight ISIS would be like clasping a viper to your own breast. I'll let you respond, of course, right after this. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, for Mayadeen television. This is the last segment. I want to hear from as many as possible here in the audience. But we even took our camera out onto the streets of London to hear what the people say.
Why do you think that Turkey has stepped up now instead of like a couple of years ago to attack ISIS?
Because it's happened on their own land, own territory.
Because it's an international pressure. It's everyone feels this pressure. All the nations. The UK feels this pressure as well against the ISIS, and obviously the US would like to maintain this or increase this pressure just to go against the ISIS together.
I think it just there was an opportunity to attack the Kurds, and Turkey considers Kurds more of a threat than ISIS, so took the opportunity and attacked.
You know, I mean, the closer ISIS moves to Turkey's borders, the more it becomes Turkey's business.
Do you think Turkey is responsible to let the jihadis using its border to go to Syria and Iraq?
I don't think, given the terrain, that Turkey can do much about it. It's a very large border, very difficult to patrol. Everyone's got limited resources.
I don't think so, no. Turkey is not a very religious place.
Back to the studio. Last few minutes. Right of reply. Go ahead, sir.
أنا كان قصدي قبل ما تنفتح الحدود التركية وينضموا مقاتلين تنظيم الدولة المهاجرين ينضموا لتنظيم الدولة بسوريا والعراق. النقطة الثانية تنظيم الدولة ما كان له قوة كبيرة قبل ما يستولي على مدينة الموصل. كان عنده مجموعات صغيرة منتشرة بكل المناطق بسوريا وبالعراق، بس ما كان عنده قوة عسكرية ضخمة وقوة مالية ضخمة جدا ما كانت عنده. لبعد ما استولى على مدينة الموصل بالعراق صار عنده قوة عسكرية، صار عنده قوة مادية بالاستيلاء على البنوك اللي كانت بمدينة الموصل. بعد الاستيلاء على مدينة الموصل صار عند تنظيم الدولة قوة. هذا الشيء ساعده بأنه يرجع على سوريا بقوة ويطرد جبهة النصرة والجيش الحر من مدينة الرقة ويستولي عليها. بهي الفترة بعد ما استولى تنظيم الدولة على مدينة الرقة قام باستيلاء على عدة ألوية من اللواء 91 بالرقة، واللي كل المعلومات بتأكد أنه النظام السوري هو قام بتسليمه لهذا اللواء. يعني وهذا اللواء كان يعتبر لواء احتياط وتخزين للأسلحة، كان مستودعات أسلحة مليانة في هذا اللواء كلها تسلمت لتنظيم الدولة بمدينة الرقة.
Well, it's funny you say that because I recall Davutoglu predicting 2 weeks until Bashar fell long before the fall of Mosul. I recall Davutoglu saying that Damascus was going to fall almost from the very beginning of the conflict. Unfortunately, we can't just have a dialogue. We've got to let other people in. Let's take this gentleman here at the front who's been waiting patiently.
Thank you, George. I just want to make a quick point about this concept that Sunni people are maybe with ISIS because they felt the new Shia government was really putting them down. I don't think that, and the Sunnis are supporting them now. I think that not to be true at all, because ISIS are probably killing more Sunnis than they are killing anyone else. And of course, these guys.
Most of the Syrian army are Sunni.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And the majority of Syria is Sunni, and it's just that these guys are just thugs. They're just criminals, and they have no religion. They have no thing. All they want is power and money. They don't care about anything else, and they will kill anyone and do it to the highest bidder, and they'll get.
Well, I wish that was true, because then we could bribe them out of the fight. I really don't think it is. However, a measure of how twisted their religious ideas are is the intricate and open discussion that they are currently having in their theoretical journals about just which girls it's permissible to rape, just which girls it's permissible to marry by force, just which girls it's permissible to sell and buy in a marketplace like cattle. It's a very peculiar idea of religion.
Absolutely. I just want to make one quick point before I pass it on. I was in Palestine in last year, and I was in Jordan as well. And I remember watching the TV, and there was a video of Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, going to a field hospital and meeting so-called Syrian fighters and greeting them in the hospital. And at that time, I thought that's not right. There's something not right there in that picture.
Patching them up and sending them back into the.
That's it. Giving them a pat on the back, a big smile, nice picture.
Indeed.
Something not right there.
Something not right. Let's take the lady in the middle who hasn't spoken yet.
My argument is that I believe it's a very legitimate argument that any of these member of the audience may have the same view. I'm not sure. I will tell you what it is. In my view, ISIS, it's not a wheel which is invented now. It's been invented before. But to blame who and say who invented this wheel is a complete, debate. I believe that we have come here, we talk so much about who's who and who to blame, this person or that person. We talk so much about the problem, we forget to talk about the solution. The solution, I think, ISIS is a global issue. You've mentioned that the neighboring countries and it's not an issue for Middle East. Look at the girls. Look at the ISIS brides. We've got girls. We've got teenagers in this country that they get brainwashed by ISIS through social media, and they join them in social media. ISIS, for me, I see it as a global issue.
It is. And our friend behind you mentioned Boko Haram, the province of Borno in Nigeria. has declared itself to be a part of the caliphate. In Sirte, in Libya, there is another territory which is declared itself a part of the caliphate. And they announced that as they decapitated and then crucified the bodies of a very large number of people, like a scene from Spartacus. So it is a worldwide phenomenon. You're right to bring that up. Let's take the gentleman in the middle there.
I listened to you very carefully. You talk about Bashar Assad still stay powerful. And I think Iraq government is still powerful too. You say right. I think Turkey opened the border for ISIS. But I think you have to say about another man in the war with ISIS. His name is General Qasem Soleimani. I want know your opinion about this man.
I have no opinion of him. I don't know him. I know nothing of him except what I read in the newspapers. If your point is that Iran is assisting the regime in Damascus, of course it is, as is the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah, as is the Russian Federation, as is the Chinese People's Republic, and not many others. And I'm glad that they are, because if I have to choose between ISIS and Bashar, I'm with Bashar. Not because I love Bashar, I don't love him. But I love him a lot more than I love ISIS. So if that's the choice, and it is, my stand is clear.
I would like to make a couple of points in regards of ISIS. ISIS, first of all, has got an ideological problem, which starts in the history, which I don't want to talk about it, started from the time of the fourth caliph, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and he defeated them and stayed in the history, and it is there, which for me, the ideology, it comes from Wahhabism, which here in the West, unfortunately, I don't blame me on this point again, we don't deal fairly on this. For instance, in the Islamic world, especially, and more specifically in the Arab world, there's like a phenomena which is called the Islamic awakening. Young people coming back to Islam. And if we had two options, one are moderate, like the example of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, we don't support them, not even support them, we support the gangsters to overtaking the power from them by force. And on the other hand, the Wahhabis, which we support in the West, they promoting the ideology of the ISIS. This is one point. The second point, which is the political one. If I analyze from, say, who's benefiting from the ISIS, as the gentleman wanted to mention and touch, there are many forces even in the region, they benefited from the existing and growing of the ISIS. And I think personally the solution is on the both layers. First, on the layer of the ideology to support the moderate as the alternative to the extremism, and on the political layer, which is in Iraq. I agree with the gentleman and Dr. Fatah, who they mentioned the safe haven for the ISIS founded in Mosul, actually. And the safe haven is the feeling of the Sunni in Iraq. And I think the ideology is there. Even if we defeat ISIS, there are many ISIS coming in this situation. Why? Simply because in the Iraq there are no anymore like loyalty for the central government, and the solution is to have a region, at least if you want to have the Iraq united, a region for the Sunnis. Let them run themselves and blame themselves for anything they suffer from, and then they have the majority in the region, which is the Shia. Right now they're demanding that and demanding for many things which if you watch the TV you can't see the demonstrations in northern Iraq, in southern Iraq. And for the Kurds, in Iraq there is no one person can have a vote from the Sunni side to the Shias, and from the Shia sides, I mean, if you nominate someone from the Sunnis, no one Shia, not a single Shia support him or vote him, and that's true for the Sunnis against the Shias, and both for the Kurds.
It might be true now. It wasn't true in the recent past. The Iraqi bloc came very close, within one seat, of winning an election, a formation that was led by a Shia, former Ba'athist leader, and people of all sects voted for the Iraqi bloc. But you're right, probably, that
You're referring to Alawi.
that horse
And Alawi was accused, by the way, by the Shias to be to the side of the Sunnis. That's another problem.
Yes, but he got votes from all communities. That's my point. But I agree with you on everything else that you said. Who'd have thunk it? Yes, sir.
أنا أولا لست مع تنظيم الدولة قولا واحدا، ولكن لست مع النظام السوري قولا واحدا أيضا. هم صنعوا تنظيم الدولة في سوريا والعراق لكي يقال أن النظام السوري أو النظام العراقي أو النظام المصري هو أحسن وأفضل من تنظيم الدولة. الوظيفة الوحيدة التي صنعوا تنظيم الدولة من أجلها هي أن يقال أن الأنظمة الدكتاتورية هي أفضل منه.
Well, I've heard some conspiracy theories in my life. If you believe that one, I have one about Elvis Presley being alive and on the moon. On board a London bus. On board a London bus. No, we're running out of time, brother.
George, I am a Syrian people.
Yeah.
I am a Syrian citizen.
But that,
I know
you've also spoken more than anybody else in the show, so I can't let you go on speaking. You'll have to forgive me. The idea that the phenomenon of ISIS was invented by what you persist in calling the dictatorship in Baghdad. I have many criticisms of it, but it's not a dictatorship. It's an elected government. No. And actually al-Maliki won not once, but twice, and was cheated of his position on the second occasion. But the idea that these two dictatorships, as you call them, are responsible for the creation of ISIS is belied by our friends' proper historical contextualization of this phenomenon. I can't go back to the fourth caliph, but I do know the story of Abdul Wahhab. This is actually the exact method of Wahhab now in the 21st century, right down to the eating of organs, the cutting of heads, the crucifixion, the taking of women and girls, right down to a T. This is the methodology of Abdul Wahhab. Now, as far as I know, he was around long before al-Maliki or Bashar al-Assad. Before I let you in, I need to find out if anyone else wants to say anything.
Just one word.
Habibi, you've spoken more words than...
Just one word.
You've spoken more words than anybody else on the show.
Some truth is not told. المالكي في الانتخابات الثانية لم يحقق الأغلبية وحققها إياد علاوي، ولكن تم فرضه فرض من قبل الأمريكيين والإيرانيين في الانتخابات الثانية. ويمكنك أن تعود للتاريخ ولعملية تشكيل الحكومة السابقة على زمن نوري المالكي وترى كيف تم تنصيبه بالقوة لنوري المالكي مع أنه لم يحقق الأغلبية، ووقتها فاز إياد علاوي وحقق الأغلبية ولم يتم تنصيبه كرئيس وزراء لأن أمريكا وإيران لم ترضى ونصبوا المالكي بالقوة كرئيس وزراء بالعراق.
Well, look, I'm not going to argue with you about that, not least because I wanted Alawi to win. But he didn't win. He didn't have a majority of the MPs. Now, no doubt, Iran has a lot of influence in Baghdad. No doubt the United States has a lot of influence. But there's no justification for calling al-Maliki a dictator. You can't be a dictator if you're elected and then elected again. Unfortunately, although we could go on all night, although this is the 5th television program I have made today, and I'm a little bit tired, it's been a marvelous discussion here in London. So, from me, George Galloway, for Kalima Horra on Al Mayadeen television, good night.